this is like the cuts position. Right. Yeah. Okay, let's put the phone down.
Cell phone, pagers, all the usual things. Don't pay attention to the cameraman. He's not off his meds. He's actually talking to someone. Huh?
How was your trip?
Allergies. It was good. It was good.
Hello? I mean, the way I understood, they're sending through our pool line, they're sending the telecoms. That's what I'm saying, shouldn't we come through?
Looks like Schweitzer to me.
Schweitzer.
I would say.
So shouldn't we come through our cuts position line?
Edgar's here, Edgar's here.
We'll find out.
Hey Edgar, how do you get these cuts back?
Need to find out what his first name is. On here they said Mark. On there they said Mark.
No, Edgar just walked in, so he's back there feverishly pulling cables out. Yeah, I'm watching it. Okay, so all he did was take a line out of the camera into a reel in the back. Okay, getting ready to start.
You guys okay? Are we good? Do you need a second?
Okay.
Let me just do a sound check with Colonel Schweitzer here, too. Colonel, this is Brian Whitman at the Pentagon. Can you hear me?
Hey, Brian, I got you loud and clear, buddy.
Thank you. And are we okay technically here? We're good to go? Okay. Well, good morning here to the Pentagon Press Corps. Good afternoon to you, Colonel Schweitzer. This is Colonel Martin Schweitzer. He's the commander of 4th Brigade Combat Team, 82nd Airborne Division. He and his unit, Task Force Fury, are responsible for security and stability operations in eastern Afghanistan. He's been commanding his unit in Afghanistan since January 23rd of this year, and this is his first opportunity in this forum to speak to the Pentagon Press Corps, and we do appreciate you taking the time to do that today. He is speaking to us from Forward Operating Base Salerno in Khost province, and he has some opening remarks that he would like to make that help set the stage for what his unit is doing out there, what the task force is doing, and then we'll take some of your questions. So with that, Colonel Schweitzer, let me turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to discuss the incredible efforts of the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Afghan National Security Forces, and our NATO partner from Poland as part of Combined Task Force Fury, 82nd Airborne Division. I'll begin by providing a brief overview of our operations in Afghanistan since our arrival in January of this year. We've been conducting operations along 3 lines: fighting the counterinsurgency, enhancing security by assisting with the development of and partnering with the national security forces, which are the Army, Police, and Border Police, and developing and expanding the influence of the government through governance, projects, construction, and in some areas, reconstruction. With respect to the first area, the combined team is fighting the insurgency by first separating the enemy from the population, second, creating effects with the communities, and then finally, ultimately transforming the environment when the threat can no longer operate within. On security, the Afghan National Security Force development and partnering is currently at different levels with different units. For example, the Army is much further along than the Police and Border Police. The Army routinely takes the lead in operations, and subsequently, the coalition is in a supporting role. The Border Police is a new organization currently being formed and at this time not operating independently. With respect to governance and expanding the reach of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, we are fortunate in RC East because we work with 5 governors who bust their tails to govern their provinces. They have many challenges, both with providing for the needs of the people as well as their own personal safety. I can tell you that these leaders demonstrate courage every day. With respect to our internal operations, 1508 is currently serving in Regional Command South as the Theater Tactical Force. They currently are conducting combined operations with the National Security Forces and our NATO partners in the Helmand Province. These operations have allowed the provincial government to gain access to a once isolated population and begin badly needed humanitarian assistance and reconstruction efforts. 2508 is conducting operations throughout the western portion of our sector where the insurgents have attempted to establish a shadow government. Together with the Afghan people and their security forces, the communities are looking towards its government for the future instead of the Taliban. This is a recent and significant shift in that particular province. 2321, our artillery battalion, along with the National Security Forces, are expanding the reach of the government to the people in the eastern portion of our sector by bringing services like police, leadership, health care, and education to the people of Khost. Recently, this province has been targeted by the Taliban and others who are taking desperate measures to slow the wheels of progress. They've committed crimes against the people in terms of suicide bombings, school burnings, and assassinations. These desperate acts only serve to further separate the Taliban from the people and show that their true goal of ruling is by fear and intimidation. The best example of this effect is the recent demonstration in the streets of Khost, led by the village elders protesting against the Taliban suicide bombers while encouraging support for the government of Afghanistan. The 508th Special Troops Battalion are closing the mountain passes between Khost and Gardez from the enemy, as well as conducting operations in southern Paktia, allowing the government to engage its people. In Paktika, on the eastern portion, our 473rd Cavalry Regiment and the 10th Mountain Division's 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment are actively separating the enemy from the population. They are assisting the government and the security forces in ensuring a stronger Afghanistan by disrupting the enemy's ability to move into Paktika. The 3rd Infantry Division's 385th Military Police Battalion is critical in providing the mentoring, coaching, and training that contributes to the development of the Afghan National Police throughout RC East. Our 782nd Support Battalion is seen all over eastern Afghanistan providing logistical support to our paratroopers. They've assisted in the expansion and reach of the government by providing humanitarian relief as well as assisting people who could not be reached by roads due to the harsh weather and mountainous terrain. The 4 PRTs are absolutely magnificent in creating effects with the population while helping develop the capacity to govern. This ad hoc group of Americans led by great Navy and some Air Force personnel are doing selfless work creating long-lasting effects in Afghanistan that will enable this country to sustain itself in the long run. Finally, the Polish Battle Group. This is an infantry battalion that's being integrated into operations in RC East. This proud formation is well trained and led, and it's going to be a privilege to serve with them. Before closing, I'd like to briefly highlight the invaluable contributions of the Joint IED Defeat Organizations, sometimes referred to as the Counter-IED Task Force. In spite of increased IED attacks, the number of IED effects has decreased significantly due to the efforts of this unit. Simply stated, they are saving lives every day in Afghanistan. Their contributions can best be measured in the following way. More sons and daughters will return safely to their families when this deployment is over, and this organization can take great pride in its contribution to that metric. I'll now take your questions.
Well, Colonel, thank you for that overview, and we do have a few questions here, so we'll go ahead and get started. Lolita.
Colonel, can you tell us a little bit about the types and the frequency of Iranian-style weapons that you are seeing coming across the border, and whether this is either increasing or leveling off?
Frankly, I think there may be even another question in that, so let me just kind of answer this in the following manner. We've only seen a few number of specific weapons that we think are from Iranian origin. But frankly, we've seen weapons that have a lot of origin from a lot of different countries since we've been here in January, and so did our predecessors, the 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain Division. So whether there's an increase or decrease, I'm not able to effectively measure that particular question. There's also a set of discussion points that I know is happening external on an increase in enhanced Iranian influence, and how much is the Iranian government contributing to that? Look, I don't know that answer. Is there an Iranian influence? Well, we think that there may be an Iranian presence throughout the battle space. But is it state-sponsored? Is it state-sanctioned? I have absolutely no ability to link that together at this time.
Go ahead, Ken.
Colonel Ken Fireman from Bloomberg News. Your brigade is, I believe, on its third recent deployment. I believe you were deployed once before to Afghanistan and also to Iraq before this most recent deployment. Are these deployments taking any kind of toll on your brigade in terms of readiness or morale or any other issues?
Yeah, let me just clarify something that you may not have exactly accurate. We're the 4th Brigade Combat Team. We were stood up in January of '06, January 27th, and our effective date of sourcing from the Department of the Army was the 16th of June of '06. So the brigade itself has not deployed. This is the brigade's first deployment. One of the battalions has deployed to Iraq on a 4 to 6 month mission in support of a particular mission profile about a year ago. So there's this brigade. It's hard for me to measure. What's the amount of stress on the individual soldier. I can tell you this: that the rotations that are ongoing right now, and with the recent talk of the extensions and all this stuff. I've been doing this for 22 years, and this is kind of how I look at it. The Department of the Army senior leadership has determined a 15-12 cycle, 15 months deployed, 12 months come back home station. I'm pretty confident that there's a lot of smart guys like Dr. Chu and other folks in the building who put a lot of rigor and analytical analysis into this thing to determine what is best for the service and what is sustainable. They've come up with 15-12. I'm absolutely confident that that's going to work, and that'll manage the pressure and the stress on the force.
Joe.
Sir, this is Joe Tabet with Al Hurra. What could you tell us about the cooperation with the Pakistani forces on the eastern side of the border?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I'll only speak from the area that I'm operating in P2KGL, and that's the southeastern portion of RC East. In my opinion, we're pretty fortunate. We run border flag meetings about every 2 weeks with the brigades from Pakistan at selected sites with the Afghan National Army Brigade leadership, the Pakistan Brigade leadership, and the coalition forces. And over the last 3 months, really over the last 8 months with the Spartan Brigade from the 10th Mountain that was here before us, but over the last 3 months, we've continued to expand the communication, the coordination to create effects in the disputed border area where the enemy may be moving back and forth to take advantage of seams between the two countries. So from my prism, over the last 3 months, coordination's been pretty significant. Trust is starting to develop, in particular with the Afghans and the Pakistan forces. And that's incredibly important in this global war on terror and the fight that's ongoing. So, in short, it's been pretty effective to date, and we expect it to continue to expand.
Colonel, we're going to continue to move on. We have lost your picture, but we have good audio, and so we're going to continue here. Joe, did you want to follow up on that?
If you can repeat his answer, that would be. His answer?
The entire answer?
If he can.
Colonel, there's a desire for you to recap that answer again, if you could.
Okay. Sure. The bottom line is there's been enhanced coordination and cooperation with the forces on the other side of the border from Pakistan. It's been executed through a series of border flag meetings at the brigade and battalion and company levels that has enhanced their communication and coordination to create effects against the threat that periodically attempts to operate in the scene between the two countries.
Very good. Appreciate that. We do have your picture back now, and so we'll continue on here too. Go ahead, Courtney.
Colonel, this is Courtney Cuby from NBC News. We've heard a lot about this spring offensive. We've been hearing about it for several months now. Has it begun? There's been sort of some incongruent reporting that whether it has begun or it has not, or whether the U.S. military and ISAF were offensive before the Taliban had their chance to begin the spring offensive. And then also, can you give us sort of a status update in your area since the spring offensive began? Are you seeing attacks going up and down, and some hard statistics to back that up?
Yeah, Courtney, let me see if I can answer it this way. I mean, I hope this is their spring offensive because it's not very effective. You know, I think what's occurred over the last 3 months, really what's occurred over the last 8 months with the application of forces and the integration of the national security forces in areas where the enemy was trying to establish a sanctuary. I think you combine that with good governance, and the 5 governors in my area going down there, getting with the population and offering them an alternate vision versus hey, just go to the Taliban or go to Al-Qaeda or go to Hekmatyar or Haqqani. You know, those guys are just basically they're hoodlums. But to instead of going to that avenue, the governors have been getting down to the people to offer them what the government can do for them. And I give you that backdrop because the spring offensive, we have seen an increase of some attacks. I would not categorize or qualify or call this a spring offensive, a coordinated attack or anything along those lines. It's exactly what we had predicted if the enemy was unable to command and control their forces, if the enemy was unable to properly organize. I think the Pakistan forces have something to do with that, with what's going on their side of the border. And I think the Afghan forces, the use of the governors, and partnering with the coalition forces has also created an effect that's prevented them from doing this big spring offensive that they've been touting. There are some moderate increases in you know, small attacks and some you know, catastrophic kind of events that they're trying to create. But we knew that would come with the good weather. Frankly, we're pretty convinced that the type of suicide attacks that have occurred, which are absolutely un-Afghanistan. I mean, Afghans don't do that. That's a real indicator to us and to the Afghan formations of the amount of desperation that the Taliban currently is incurring. They did not want to go to the suicide. They're trying to get the hearts and minds of the people as well, and they're losing it when they start murdering the civilians, when they start murdering the kids. So I guess that's how I'd answer it. No, we don't think this is an effective offensive. I kind of hope it is, because if that's as good as they got, we're in pretty good shape, and the Afghan National Security Forces are going to get to develop their capacity over time without being interrupted by this threat.
And do you have any statistics to give us an idea? I mean, General Votel spoke with us last week, and he spoke about, you know, trends of attacks. But do you know any hard numbers? I mean, numbers of attacks per week now versus a month ago or 3 months ago, or anything to show a trend?
Yeah, Courtney, what I'll do is I don't have that at my hand, but I'll have the PAO send my public affairs team send something back to the folks back there with some of the hard data that's at their fingertips. But I can just generally tell you there's been it's a modest increase from what we've currently been experiencing over the last 3 months. If I compared this time to what's occurred last April this time, I would tell you the border activities and border actions have been significantly reduced. And that's much in part to the fact that we've increased 2 brigades here, plus the introduction of the Polish battle group. So along the border, those activities have decreased. We're seeing a bit of a spike on the interior, as we also had expected. It's not surprisingly, because as we cut off and disrupt the access back and forth between the border area, that's a lot of their C2 sourcing. So the folks that are on the interior are having to move around. I think the last component to that modest increase within the interior is the fact that we've got 2 brigades in the battle space. You know, we put an extra 5,200 soldiers out there, and sailors, airmen, Marines to get after it. And it's kind of like a contact sport. When you put more people on the field, you're going to bump into more people, and that's kind of what's happening.
Al, you got a four-parter for us?
Two or three.
Colonel, try to keep it to two.
Colonel, this is Al Pessin from Voice of America. I wanted to ask you to expand on two things from your opening statement. One is where you talked about the shadow government that the Taliban's trying to expand in one area. Can you tell us about that and what you're doing about it? And the other is about the Joint IED Task Force. I think you said more attacks but less effective. And I'd appreciate if you could expand on that. And we're all dying to know what P2KGL is.
Okay, great. The P2KGL, and I'll take this backward to front if I can. The P2KGL is just the first letters of the initials of the provinces that we operate within. So we've got Pektika and Pektia, Logar and Khost and Ghazni. Those are the 5 areas that we operate within. Reference the IED task force and its effects. I'm going to ask that you bear with me on this. What I don't want to do is provide any of the specifics of the number of IED attacks the enemy has attempted versus the number that has actually been prosecuted or executed, and then subsequently what were the effects of those. I can just tell you I'm being absolutely frank and 100% honest that there is a significant difference between what they've attempted to do and what they've been able to do. The enemy's also taken book, and so when they're measuring this and we start giving numbers, they start putting it into their little calculations and figure out what they can do to ramp up and ramp down and modify. And that's why there's probably not the hard data at your hands, but we track it. We track it pretty closely, and I can just tell you this, that we're able to operate freely throughout our battle space, despite the attempts of the enemy to use that particular tool. And the problem is, you know, it's really frustrating. We understand, come after us. We understand that. We're the uniformed personnel, uniformed members. But the enemy's going after the civilians and the soft underbelly of the Afghan population. We're very fortunate in Afghanistan that it is an un-Afghan-like type of tactic. And it is not accepted or received well. And it is backfiring on the enemy on their I.O. And this is I.O. fratricide. And unfortunately, they're still continuing to do it. But fortunately, you know, Jaedo and all those great Americans are getting after it and reducing the impact of it onto all the formations as well as the Afghan National Security Forces. Reference the shadow government. Look, there's this, there's this perspective that the enemy's going back and forth, and then it comes back when they're ready to operate, you know, in the nice weather. I think we have a different look at this battle space. There is a lot of trans movement back and forth between Pakistan and Afghanistan. There's also a certain number of people that stay dormant and then, when instructed, come alive and try to start influencing the government and the governance activities at the provincial and district levels. So we'll take, you know, Ghazni, for example. That's in the western portion of the battle space that we're currently operating within. It's led by a great governor, Governor Patan. The shadow government that they've tried to erect there out of Andar and Karabar and Giro, which are some districts, what we've done to counter that is move forces in. But it's just not coalition forces, because that's a U.S. solution to an Afghan problem. The best thing that we're finding out is putting Afghan forces, Afghan government, and the U.S. forces facilitate and assist with the security. So, for example, this is how you counter what's going on in Andar. And then I'll give you a specific example that kind of says, you know, 2 + 2 does equal 4. We've put a combined team down there in Andar, which is one of the historically troubled districts. This combined team was made up of Afghan National Security Forces, Afghan National Army, and Afghan National Police. They went and they did the inner cordon and inner security. Our forces did the outer security. They then brought in the governor and the district governor, and they ran what they call a SHUR, and that's a meeting with all the village leaders to identify their problems, to see if we could bring needs, we being the Afghan community, bring needs back down to that particular district. So they coordinated to do all this work, and then they said, come back in another week, and then we're going to, you know, governor will come back down and show you what the solution is to your problems or how they're going to help you out. So they ran this second shura in a school, and all the village leaders, as well as the surrounding districts, came to this particular shura. And during the shura, the enemy, the Taliban, came and started shooting rockets at the shura. And what we had expected to see, or thought we may have seen, is a lot of pandemonium, running, getting the kids out of there, getting all the elders out, and then there would just be ANSF and coalition forces left. What we saw was pretty incredible. We saw that the leaders got everybody calm, took the kids, put them in the school, came back out and continued the shura. They grabbed the microphone and they said, that's what the Taliban's doing. It's trying to kill our kids. It's trying to hurt our future. It's trying to affect us. It's trying to prevent our government from governing. Look, I got to tell you, there's nothing that we could have done more effectively to counter this shadow government that they're trying to get alive to come up and operational in Ghazni. And so that's what we're trying to do. We try to create white space between the enemy and the population with the Afghan National Security Forces by separating them. Then we try to bring the governor and the other reconstruction folks down from the PRTs. We try to get the district governors, which is the lower level, and most importantly, the village leaders that represent those families to come together and let Afghans work with Afghans to create an Afghan solution. And I got to tell you, that has been incredibly effective in the last 3 months. But frankly, we'd like to take credit for it, but you got to go back to 310, which is the brigade from the 10th Mountain Division led by Colonel Mick Nicholson. He really developed this strategy, and we're just getting the privilege to continue to grow it and expand it as it matures.
Mike.
Colonel, it's Mike Mount from CNN. You mentioned that the attacks are really starting to kind of focus on the civilian population now. Are you seeing any kind of backlash at all from the civilians towards the coalition and Afghan troops in terms of anger that you all aren't doing more, or a lack of cooperation in terms of giving you intel or anything?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I appreciate it. And I'll tell you an answer, and I'll give you a couple examples. The first is we have very pleasantly found and are surprised that there's not only zero backlash towards the coalition, the ANSF, but there's a demand for the people to get more Army and police personnel down in their sectors to protect them from the enemy. Now look, that statement by itself doesn't seem very complicated, but what's so significant is it's all these border regions that have got these tribal relationships that are along the border are stopping to look at other members of their tribe for the answer and looking to their government for help. We are closely associated with the government forces, and we are enjoying a significant support, we think, from the Afghan population. But it's not because we're the U.S. or we're coalition. It's because we're partnering with the Afghan National Security Forces because they're out front in the execution of this. We're trying to do the outer ring so the Afghan security forces do the contact with their Afghan people. In 3 specific examples, and I highlighted one in Andar, but I'd like to comment on what I said in the opening comment about Khost. You know, Khost is it's a pretty developed city in Afghanistan. It's been a target of suicide IEDs. We think it's going to continue to be a target of IEDs for the Taliban, and you know, it's just not working for them. They keep doing this with their intention to intimidate the population, to have them stop looking at the government, to have them stop asking for the Afghan National Security Forces to help them, to have them say, we're only doing this because the coalition's there. But the population's going, hey, look, that makes no sense. If you don't like the coalition, hit them. Don't hit my kids. Don't hit my family. Don't burn my school. It's inconsistent. And so when I mentioned the previous demonstration that the Khoustites have done over the last 3 months, but this is the second one they've done in the last 6 months. And that's pretty significant because, you know, look, this country's been at war for 30 years. The Taliban enjoyed a significant freedom of maneuver up till 0102. Now they're trying to come back in, and instead of fighting ideas, which their ideas are just death and destruction, they're now really getting to a point where they're using these IEDs and they're targeting the population, they're targeting the kids, they're targeting the schools, they're targeting the medical clinics. You know, yeah, I mean, this is my second tour to Afghanistan, and it never, I keep getting amazed how durable and common sense bright the Afghan people are. They know this is a bad deal for them. And so they're the ones who are saying no more. It'd be nice if, you know, we could say, you put coalition in there and freedom will come. Here's what you do. You put a coalition force in there and you get the Afghan people to say no more, and you get them to turn away from the threat, and you get them to turn to their government. And the great news is that word, that noun, you or your, it's not us. It's the Afghans doing it based upon their own decisions, what they're seeing occurring in the battle space to their kids.
Got time for about one more. Go ahead, Lloyd.
Colonel, it's Louis Martinez with ABC News. You mentioned the need for Afghan security forces in your battle space. Is there a greater need for Afghan police than Afghan Army? And if so, what is the requirement that you need, and how much longer will it take to get to what you actually need in those provinces?
Okay, that's great, and that's one of the major lines of operation that we're working. And let me answer the last piece first on time, because I know that's a hot button issue. I can't give you a time. It's conditions based, and that may not be as comforting to hear, but it's a fact. I'll just give a background. I was here in 2002. In 2002, there was one Kandak battalion, and it worked with my battalion, 3505 from the 82nd. And it was a set of unique operations that we performed together. Today, there are 4 corps and 8 brigades. It's around 30 or 35,000 soldiers in the ANA. The police and the border police, I think, make up around 60 or 70,000. Don't hold me to that because I don't have the exact figures in my hands. But although that's a number, their training capacity is significantly lower than that of the Army right now. And so it's taken about 4 years for the Afghan National Army to become one of the most respected institutions in Afghanistan, which it's becoming, if it hasn't already become that. And we get that from the people. I mean, that's where it really counts, because when we show up, they ask, where's our Army? We'd like our Army here. But the police development it's the focus of the Task Force 82. It's one of the focuses of Task Force 82, my higher headquarters, over the next year, as well as with Task Force Phoenix and Combined Security Training Command out of Kabul. We're putting a significant amount of effort of both training and partnering. And I want to emphasize that word partnering, because that's where you actually take what they're learning and applying it in the field, partnered and integrated in with U.S. formations. And so that, that's what we're doing to develop that particular capacity. I know that you're really looking for me to say, okay, so how long is that going to take? I can't give you that answer. I can tell you it's going to be a little while, because you got to go through this whole cycle of storm, norm, form, and then be able to employ that capability in the battle space independently. If you're looking for some percentages, we've got the brigades that I get the privilege to work with. Already one of my battalions has been subordinate to a brigade operation, but from the Afghan National Army. We're going to be doing a series of operations here in the very near future where my headquarters is going to be subordinate to the Corps Commander. And that's not just lip service. I mean, they're going to do the planning, they're going to do the rehearsals, they're going to have a mentor team, not from my headquarters, but from another headquarters that's assisting them as they develop this particular set of skill sets and capacities. I got to tell you, I'd have never imagined that 4 years ago when I was here, never. And now I'm going to be subordinate to one of the corps here in Afghanistan for a series of operations, which I think is phenomenal. The AMP is not there yet, and the ABP is brand new. So we've got a lot longer time with the border police than we do with the national police.
Well, Colonel, we have reached the end of our time, but this has been extremely useful and valuable to us, and we appreciate you taking the time this afternoon to answer our questions and to give us an overview of what your unit is doing there. Before I bring it to an end, let me just turn it back to you in case you have any closing comments or thoughts that you'd like to make.
I do, thanks. First of all, it's been a privilege, and I thank you for the questions, and I hope that they were helpful. If they're not, you can contact our PAO, and we'll try to give you more expanded answers. And we do owe you that one set of metrics that we'll get to you. But finally, look, as always, I'd like to thank 2 groups of people, the service members and their families. The troops can't thank them enough for their incredible daily performances of heroism, taking care of each other while assisting with providing freedom for 25 million Afghans. And they do all of this without asking for any credit. They just do it because they're great Americans and they're America's treasures. And to their families. The family members, both mothers and fathers of these service members and their incredible spouses and kids, for the contributions and sacrifices they make every day on behalf of our nation. They don't get paid. They just quietly pray for their loved ones to get the mission done and come home. I stand in awe of both of these groups of people. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel, and we hope that we'll have an opportunity to talk to you again in the not-too-distant future.
Thank you.